Yoshiyuki Hata spent 20 years making a single calligraphy brush, collecting and combining only the best hairs. He's been making brushes since he was a teenager. And he's meticulous. If even a single hair is out of place, it must be removed. This level of mastery is only achieved through a lifelong dedication to a craft. From an amateur historian in Tunisia who has spent years reconstructing an ancient purple dye made from snails, to a Damascus knife bladesmith who refused to give up after he failed the mastery exam. Artisans in every corner of the world have trained to notice the little details that no one else can. In Japan's Hiroshima prefecture, this family-run workshop has been making flawless calligraphy brushes for over 90 years.
Calligraphy is a respected art form in Japan and has been practiced for centuries. But today, there aren't many skilled brush makers left. Yoshiyuki Hata is a third-generation brush maker and has been making calligraphy brushes since he was a teenager.
この筆がね、1本作るのに20年かかって、私が50から作り始めて、今70でちょうど完成したんです。
His family's workshop in Kawajiri focuses on what they call no-compromise craftsmanship. Each brush tip is handmade by a single artisan. But making these brushes isn't easy.
この線が出したい線それに合う筆を作ることですね。
For a master calligrapher like Daiso Kaneko, small differences in a brush's hardness or ink retention can drastically affect the lines it can produce.
表現したいと思った時に、この微妙な5ミリの差とか長さの差とか、本当に少しの硬さ、柔らかさや、それから毛のバネの強さとか、いろんなことが筆っていうのは一本一本違うので。
The dozens of steps involved in brush making start with selecting the hair. Different types of hair have a big impact on the price of a brush. Yoshiyuki's specialty is one of the priciest, goat hair. This hair was collected 50 years ago from the chest of Yangtze River Delta white goats. Hair from this specific breed of goat is classified as type 3 hair, based on its size, luster, and elasticity. It's a highly sought-after hair for brush making because it's soft yet durable and retains ink well.
初心者いうか、学童さんが使うのはやっぱり硬い筆、馬、タヌキ。だんだん柔らかいのは今の羊毛筆なんかは腕が19歳じゃないと使えないんで。
But today, this type of hair is hard to find in large quantities and can cost thousands of dollars per kilogram. Selecting high-quality hair is done entirely by eye, and it's one of the hardest skills for a new brush maker to learn.
原毛用で言ったら色、艶、耐久性、あと見てこれは10年20年持たないないうなけはそこで一本一本こう寄る時に抜いていくんですよね。
But this long process is just beginning. Once the hairs are chosen, they're boiled and combed to remove any fluff. This process separates straight, long hairs, which are ideal for brush making. One of the most time-consuming steps is aligning all of these hairs. This delicate work is key to making a uniform brush, but it's largely based on experience and instinct.
とにかく自分の目と手でこうやって揃えた分が完成形なんよね、先揃えの。
Throughout the process, brush makers patiently remove any imperfect or damaged hairs.
そうですね、無駄毛あんだけ取ったらもう毛がなくなるんじゃないか言われるんですが、それもこれだけ出る印を頭に置いて設計をするからあれだけ取って取らないと描くのに割れたりとかいい線が出ないからね。もう筆作りを始めたのがやはり工房が 遊び場だったんで、ちっちゃい頃から。それはね、200パターンぐらいは頭の中にあるんですよね、設計図が。まあやっぱし目と手と勘ですよね。
At this stage, Yoshiyuki's vision for a brush starts to take shape. After trimming, he wets the hair and combines different bundles to create a brush that is dense and durable. Then he dips the hair in funori, an adhesive liquid made from seaweed, to hold the hairs together.
あと書道家の先生だから出丈が1ミリ2ミリ0コマ何ミリ言われるから、それに工程でも手を抜いたらその筆は僕はダメじゃもし思いますね。魂が入っとらんから。
The finished brush tip is almost unrecognizable from the raw hair. But the precise work isn't over yet. Once the hair dries, Yoshiyuki ties up the ends and burns each one with a hot iron, binding the hairs together. Any mistake here could ruin a month of work. Finally, it's time to assemble the brush. Like the brush tip, each handle is custom made.
軸はやはり軸屋さんいて、これは奈良の私たちみたいな親子でやってる職人さんが、太さが皆先生によって手の筆圧大きさが違う。
This time-consuming process, along with the materials used, means these brushes can cost 100 times more than a mass-produced brush. The price varies based on the size and type of brush. A larger brush requires more hair, which naturally increases the price. Hata Bunshindo brushes often cost around $1,300, but some brushes can cost a lot more.
僕が作った筆の中で一番高いものは200万ぐらいのものになります。先代が作ったものですと300万ぐらいのものがあります。
Despite the high price, these brushes are essential tools for calligraphers like Daizo. He followed in the footsteps of his father and grandfather and has been practicing calligraphy for 20 years.
だから自分がイメージしているものに筆を合わせてくる場合と、筆で作品がイメージが膨らんでいくというか、これは優しい表現をしたいときは少し柔らかいそういうことを選びますし、きちっとしたものを描きたいときは少し短めのちょっと硬めの筆を選んだりということで、自分に合う筆っていうのを探していくのは非常に楽しいですし。
Some brush makers mix natural and synthetic hair to make brushes more affordable, but Yoshiyuki remains committed to using only the highest quality materials. Kozo, Yoshiyuki's son, will be the workshop's fourth generation brush maker.
やはり父も職人であまり言葉を通して伝えるっていうことはしないしできない人間なので、自分が見て学ぶ、それから作っていったものの結果がいいものになれば父はうなる、よし、それ悪ければもうただひたすら違う。
But like many traditional crafts, the future of brush making is unclear. Demand for handmade brushes is in decline. Some brush makers have started selling makeup brushes to bring in new customers. But the main concern for Yoshiyuki and his family is the lack of raw materials.
5代目がこれから出てくるのか、それからその人がやるときにいい原料が果たしてあるのかっていうものが一番懸念してますね。筆業界全体が作る人が減ってきたり、書道業界の人口も減っているので、やはり下火にはなるんですが、それは常にずっとこれから僕が職人人生の中で課題にあると思います。
Finding enough artisans to carry on a trade is a challenge shared by many crafts. In Morocco, making Zalij tile mosaics relies on skilled artisans to chisel hundreds of tiles by hand and pass their decades of knowledge on to the next generation. One of these artisans is Ahmed Al-Maghari, who's been making Zalij tiles for 54 years. Artisans turn a simple mixture of clay and water into a complex work of art.
While perfection is often valued, it's the imperfect qualities of zellige that make the tiles so unique. Artisans in Morocco have been hand-making zellige tiles for centuries. Today, they continue this tradition in the city of Fez.
يعني خدمه ما كتشبه الخدمه وهندسه ما كتشبه الهندسه حتى كيولي الانسان عنده مقتدر كيولي عنده واحد التجربه في الصنعه لان الصنعه ما يمكنلكش تقول انا راني معلم ما عمرك ما تقول انا معلم لان ديما كتتعلم ديما الجديد.
But before artisans at Arabesque can create tiles, they first need to form the clay. Fez has remained a center for zellige partly because of these rocks. They're considered some of the best materials in the region for making high-quality clay.
الطين هذا ديال المغرب هذا الاصل ديالو مغربي وكاين غير في مدينه فاس.
This clay is believed to be more durable than some clays found further south, and it can withstand very high temperatures once fired. First, an artisan tosses the rocks into a pit in the ground called a zuba. They fill the zuba with water and leave the rocks to soften for a day. Then, in one of many tedious stages to come, an artisan kneads the clay using their hands and feet to make it more malleable. After the clay has fermented for a day, a different artisan has the task of molding it into the proper shape. The artisan places the clay into a mold, smoothing it over with one hand so the surface is flat. For every 10 kilograms of clay, artisans can make over 10 square feet, or about 1 meter, of tiles. After molding hundreds of tiles, they leave the clay to dry under the sun. The next stage is vital to ensuring the tiles will remain intact.
نحطوا القلم فوق منها القياس كنجيب واحد الكوتشيه جنويه كيضربها باش كتزقاد كتعطينا سنتيم ونص سنتيم وشويه على حساب القياس اللي بغينا حنا.
Hitting the clay repeatedly also removes air bubbles. If the air isn't removed, the tile may break when an artisan later tries to chisel it. Once each piece is perfectly square, the tiles dry again under the sun. Finally, it's time for the clay to head to the kiln. Precision is critical at this stage, which is why just one person is trusted to lead the job.
وكنهزوه كنجيبوه المرحله هي هذه كيبس ملي كنجيبوه كيبس المرحله كندخلوه للفرينه احنا كندخلوه للفرينه هي هذه كيدخل الفرينه كيكون الشحان عندنا شحان اختصاصي بهذا الشيء لما كنش هو ما يتشحنش هذه الفرينه بالاختصاص تعلم هذه الحرفه هذه تعلمها من الطفوله ديالو.
Abdelwahed glazes the tiles and then they're fired for a second time. This second firing ensures the color won't fade. It also gives zellige tiles one of their most distinct features. Heat doesn't circulate evenly in a traditional Moroccan kiln, which is why each tile, even those with the same color glaze, will have a slightly different shade. But these tiles are just getting started. After glazing, the tiles move on to the cutting stage, where artisans trace the small shapes they'll later carve. Chiseling the tiles requires total concentration. Artisans must carve each piece as cleanly as possible. Otherwise, it may not fit properly into the final design. How well and efficiently this is done depends on the expertise of the artisan and a tool known as the menkash. It's a combination of a hammer and an axe. Because they're hand-chiseled, no two zellige tiles will look exactly the same. It's the prime feature that distinguishes zellige from mass-produced tiles that are notably uniform in color, shape, and texture. Arabesque first creates designs on the computer. Then Ahmed uses a paper printout as a guide to assemble the final design on the floor. Ahmed inserts each individual tile by hand, like a puzzle piece, making sure every tile seamlessly fits next to its neighbor.
يعني كتشوف العين ديالك باليد ديالك الحواس ديالك كلها عقلك الحواس ديالك كلها كتخدم مع داك الحاجه اللي كتكون كتخدم فيها بعد سميتو 1000 قطعه عاد يمكن لا تعمر لك متر وبعد الخطره يمكن غير مثلا 100 قطعه غتعمر لك متر.
After about 15 days of assembling the pieces, Ahmed can reveal the finished design.
ها هو نفس طبق الاصل. هاي ها الرسمه اللي عطاونا من الاداره ها هو طبق الاصل. يعني كاينين جوج ها الرسمه اللي عطاونا من الاداره احنا خدمنا عليها. فهمتيني؟ كي كتشوف هذا الرسمه هنا اللي كاينه في البلانه وما هنا كاينه.
The final price of a mosaic like this is the sum of several factors, including the number of pieces and their shape.
This is the average, normal 36 pieces. The shape of it is very square, so the price of it is very affordable. Unlike if we go here, which is made of stars and cross. There are 36 pieces by 36, so 36 pieces here also, but the price of this is 4 times the price of the other one because of the shape.
Adil also considers the size of the tiles within a design. Smaller pieces are not as simple to chisel by hand. The smaller the tiles, the more expensive the design will be.
There are areas where you have a square foot that can have 64 pieces, 128 pieces, 360 pieces versus 36 pieces. So if you have one that costs $10 per square foot, the other one might cost 10 times $100 per square foot.
The price increases further for more complex designs.
This tile has an interlace. The interlace is automatically double the price. So if you have a $10 square foot, with the interlace it's $20.
Centuries ago, Zalij tiles were reserved for royal palaces. Today, they've become synonymous with Moroccan design. You'll find them covering walls, floors, and fountains across Fez.
When we talk about Morocco and Moroccan architecture, the first thing comes to mind is Zalij.
But its influence goes beyond Morocco. Demand has grown in the US, especially in recent years, as notable designers like Kelly Worsler incorporate Zalij into their own work. But the way some are using the tiles is different. Rather than mosaics, they're creating monochromatic backsplashes. Part of the appeal of using just one color of Zalij is that it appears ombre when multiple tiles come together, thanks to their subtle variation in shade. But while Zalij becomes more popular overseas, Adil struggles to find young people locally he can trust with the trade.
This is more of a living art, but it's also a dying tradition. Nowadays, people are not patient as much as in before. If you look at the people who used to work in this trade, they are very calm, they are very peaceful, they have inner peace. Nowadays, we find extreme hardship to train and adopt people who can carry this kind of tradition as Zalij artisans.
إنسان أي عمل من هذا كيخصو يعطيه الحق ديالو. أي عمل يمشي الإنسان يقوم به تيخصو يعني يعطيه الحق ديالو. الصنعة إنسان إلا بغى مثلا يملكها ولا شي حاجة راه تيخصو يعطيها حقها ويعطيها الوقت ديالها باش كيكسب واحد المهارات ومع الطولان ديال الحياة ديالو هو محدو هو تيخدم هو تيتعلم. راه ماشي المعلم تيتسمى راه معلم ديما تيبقى تيتعلم الحياة ديالو كلها ديما تيبقى يتعلم.
The quality of Zalij depends on the hand that makes it. Preserving it means finding more artisans like Ahmed, willing to spend decades learning the craft behind this signature Moroccan design.
Sometimes, artisans don't just preserve, they revive. It takes nearly 45 kilograms of these snails to produce a single gram of pure Tyrian purple extract. In the ancient world, Tyrian purple dye was so rare that only royalty could afford to wear clothes dyed with it. But production of the dye in the traditional way ended hundreds of years ago. In modern-day Tunisia, a craftsman has dedicated himself to painstakingly rekindling this lost art. This is Mohammed Ghassan Nouira. He's been making Tyrian purple dye in his home in Tunisia for 15 years. Today, Ghassan is one of a handful of producers in the world bringing this ancient dye back to life. Ghassan learned how to make this dye through an excruciating process of trial and error. Because there's no instruction manual, he reconstructed the techniques he uses from 1st century texts.
Oh my God, I must say that I have gone through a lot of failures. The historical texts about the process of making Tyrian purple are very rare and are quite vague, so you have to start everything from scratch and learn everything on your own.
To make the extract, Ghassan must navigate a complex process, and it's this extensive labour that accounts for much of the final price. The part of the murex snail that contains the pigment is called the hyperbranchial gland.
The good thing is that the gland is located right under the shell, which helps a little bit in the extraction.
It's the only part of the snail used to make Tyrian purple, and each gland contains only a few drops of pigment. But before he can extract the gland, Ghassan has to wash, scrub, and sort the snails by size.
You don't really want all of this mud and sand to interfere with the dye when you crush the shell and expose the gland. So this is the first step, and it's a very important step. You really have to clean your snails very, very well.
Ghassan can now extract the gland from the clean snails. If he hammers each shell too lightly, it'll take too long. But if he hits it too hard, he'll crush the gland. It took Ghassan 2 years to learn how to do this efficiently.
And of course, the snail is not wasted, then it will be cooked for dinner. Everything is basically recycled.
To make the extract, Ghassan first macerates the fresh glands in cold water and lets them ferment in an airtight container. Once the glands release their colorant, Ghassan gently washes and filters the mixture to separate the dye from the flesh. This is the first of 6 separate rounds of purification necessary to make a pure Tyrian purple extract. Now Ghassan can dry the pigment mixture. He applies it to a sheet of glass and lets it dry under the sun. He uses glass because it won't absorb any of the valuable pigment.
So these glands have been drying for 3 days. They are half dry now. They're still malleable, as you can say. This is the pure colorant, or more or less pure.
Once the pure colorant mixture is dried, he scrapes it off the glass with a razor, making sure to get every last bit.
And the whole process, from the liquid colorant up until the dried pure powder, the whole mass will have lost at least 98% of its weight.
The dry pigment is now purified 5 more times in a grinding and sieving process to remove any detritus. The nearly 100 pounds of murex snails are finally transformed into 1 gram of pure Tyrian purple extract. And acquiring enough snails is another challenge, an expensive one. Ghassan can spend hundreds of dollars sourcing the snails he needs for his dye. That's because finding these snails requires experienced fishers. One of the fishers Ghassan works with is Salim Ben Milad. He harvests murex snails from Solomon Beach. Like Ghassan, Salim and his team have perfected their technique over time.
بالطبيعة لهنا صعيب تحديد المواقع برشا تحت الماء، راهو البحر كبير برشا كما تعرف البحر وكبره يلزمك تعرف البقايع وتقمر يعني وتشد في مخك. وحتى في الأحجار يعني تحت الماء فما أحجار معين يحبوا.
It can take Salim 4 hours to find the right snails, or he can dive for a whole day to no avail.
بالطبيعة أهم حاجة احنا يعني في خدمتنا إنه يبدأ المناخ باهي يعني وطقس مزيان احنا نقولوا وراكح ويبدأ الرؤية في الماء يعني تحت الماء باهية يعني واضحة.
The bloodmouth snail is particularly difficult to catch. and requires Salim to dive 15 meters deep, which makes it more expensive. And if the weather is consistently bad, the price goes up even more. Sometimes, conditions force Salim and his team to go a whole month without fishing, but it's out of their control.
اللي يطلبوا غسان للبوغرنو هذا اللي خرجنا منه كما اللي شفنا منه طاول.
It's dangerous for the snails too, which are highly sensitive to climate change. Since the early 1970s, the population of murex snails has steeply declined due to temperature changes in the water and overharvesting.
We have to be very cautious not to be engaged in overharvesting, to make sure that the small specimens are put back into the sea to preserve the species. So this is why it takes a lot of time.
And careful management of the snail population is vital, as Ghassan and his divers attempt to revive Tunisia's thousands-year-old dye-making tradition. Ghassan doesn't use all the fresh snails to make extract. He reserves some to dye fabric directly. This time, he mixes the snail glands with water and a reducing agent and lets them ferment. The mixture goes from a colourless liquid to green before it turns purple. Finding the right pH balance in this step is crucial. If it's too acidic, the wool may burn, and if it's too basic, it may cause the wool to felt.
So now we're just monitoring the pH. It's about 8, which is perfect.
This is also the moment when the soluble dye is the most light sensitive. Ghassan must cover the dye vat immediately to avoid too much exposure to light. Too much light can turn the dye from purple to blue, destroying a week's worth of work. When the material has soaked for the appropriate amount of time, Ghassan lifts the vat lid, exposing the mixture to light and air. This allows the mixture to oxidize.
And this is how the color will gradually start to develop.
But one round of vat dyeing won't always do the trick. Like with this silk scarf.
It took me like 8 months to produce, and it required like 800 pounds of fresh snails. And this is still not completed.
And it's not always guaranteed that the color will come out the same shade.
Historically speaking, there isn't a single hue or shade of Tyrian purple. It's a range of shades that ranges from the color of clotted blood to the color of red purple.
This range is the result of mixing 3 different subspecies of murex snails. Hexaplex trunculus, which produces a violet blue colour, Bolinus brandaris, which secretes the colour of clotted blood, and the bloodmouth, or Stromonita hemastoma, which releases a rich red purple colour. Tyrian purple dye dates back to the Bronze Age and is named after the Phoenician city of Tyre. Some historians believe it was produced as early as the 21st century BC. Ancient civilizations from Phoenicia to the Carthaginian and Roman empires prospered by producing and trading this dye. One of the production sites was Menings on the island of Jerba, which is now an archaeological site.
لأنها مادة ثمينة جدا، وبما أنها مادة ثمينة فقد قرر الأباطرة الرومان في بداية الإمبراطورية أن لا يقع استعماله إلا من طرف الوجهاء حتى يقع التفريق بين الأشخاص.
A text from the 4th century states that a single pound of Tyrian purple dye costs 3 pounds of gold. But production of this dye came to a screeching halt in the 15th century after the fall of the Byzantine Empire.
دراسة الزيت والزيتونة في أفريقيا الشمالية في القديم، ثم دراسة الأرجوان، هذا صنع الأرجوان المتاجر به، والرخام إلى آخره، كل ما هو علاقة بالتجارة والموانئ.
Ali says he's grateful that Ghassan is reviving this culturally valuable dye so Tunisians can reconnect with their ancestry. Ghassan learned about the dye at the age of 14 and was enthralled by its history in Carthage. Over a decade later, he found a murex snail on the shore, oozing purple.
My old passion for red purple came rushing from its deep slumber, and I really had this revelation. And this is how my adventure for reviving this legendary dye started.
Now, he hopes to ramp up his production, offering more shades of pigment.
Well, of course, my dream is to enlarge this project and to create an old-fashioned dye factory and to produce more. But as I said, the main concern should always be to preserve the species, because if there is no murex, there is no dye.
Rich, deep colours often require an expert hand to achieve. In Japan, Hisao Manabe takes 1 to 2 months to dye threads a deep indigo blue. Denim made from these threads will maintain this rich colour, and so will Manabe's nails for 3 weeks. That's because Manabe uses real indigo instead of the synthetic dyes most jeans are made with today. Making denim this way requires meticulous attention at each stage of production.
In basic terms, Japanese denim refers to denim made in Japan, but today it often implies selvage denim. The name comes from the way fabric is woven on these old shuttle looms. They weave fabric with a sealed or self-finished edge, hence the name selve edge. It means the end of the fabric won't fray or unravel. You'll notice a pair of selvage jeans by the cuff. There's typically a colored line along the outseam. This type of denim is made here in Kojima, Japan.
本当に10代からジーンズはこの町のジーンズを履いてたと。
Momotaro is one of Kojima's most well-known denim brands. But before Momotaro makes denim, it must first dye the threads. The company's most expensive jeans are hand-dyed with natural indigo. Natural indigo comes from the leaves of the indigofera plant. Dyeing fabric with natural indigo has been a valued art form in Japan for centuries.
単純作業の繰り返しよね。根気がいるのと原料が高い。これはやはりもっと工夫していかなきゃやっぱり量産できないと思う。
Manabe dyes 60 rolls of cotton over several days. He wrings each roll out and hangs it up to dry before dyeing another.
5回でこのぐらい。これは乾くと半分ぐらいの色になっちゃう。
Manabe must dye each roll a total of about 30 times. Otherwise, the color won't be a dark enough blue. Dyeing jeans this way doesn't only take longer, it also costs more. A kilogram of some synthetic indigo can cost between $4 and $5. Depending on the quality, natural indigo might cost 10 times that.
非常に高い。大体我々がその調達するのは1票15万ぐらいするんだね。
That one bale is only enough to dye about 15 pairs of jeans. Although using natural dye raises the cost of production, it has unique effects on jeans that can't be produced by synthetic dyes.
植物には青の染料だけでなくて余分な染料もあるね。少し黄みがかった染料が含まれている。そういったものがやはり微妙に青の色を変化させる。そこにはインディゴでは出せない色がある。
Today, cheaper synthetic dyes have mostly replaced natural ones, so jeans still made with natural dyes are often considered a premium product. Which is partly why Momotaro's Kinton or gold-labeled jeans are worth over $2,000. The increased price of this pair is a nod to the extra effort, skill, and money needed to dye the threads by hand and get the color just right. Not all Japanese denim or Momotaro jeans are made with natural indigo. But even so, the price remains high, around $200 to $300 for a pair like this. And that goes back to the way Japanese denim is woven. Before Toyota made cars, it made looms like this. Originally introduced in the 1920s, these Toyota looms are no longer made today. And although they look and sound like they're working fast, weaving fabric this way takes 5 times longer than weaving on modern projectile looms.
もともと世界で、アメリカで、作られたジーンズもその当時はその機械しかなかった。もう今1世紀経ってもヴィンテージのそのジーンズがやはり、1900年あるいは1920年、ね、あたりのジーンズがいい。でやはり何百万も出して古着を買い集めるわけです。
Despite the looms being automated, an experienced Momotaro technician has to keep a close eye on them as they run. He checks to see each loom is working smoothly and that all the threads are aligned correctly. Even so, it's possible something will go wrong.
直しながら使ってますね。部品は新しく作られていませんので、その部品一つ一つを、古い機械から、外して、使ったり。
On top of weaving slowly, the looms produce fabric less than a yard wide. That's about half the width of non-selvage denim, so producers need more fabric to make a pair of selvage jeans. This is yet another factor that increases the cost of production and ultimately the final price of the jeans. Shuttle looms are also less precise than projectile looms, but variations in the fabric make each yard unique. And ironically, that's what gives these jeans one of their biggest appeals. While most other jeans have a smooth surface, Japanese denim is a little bit rougher.
この凹凸がやはりデニムで一番大切な経年変化の縦落ち、当たり、そういったものに現れている。
While most Momotaro jeans are made on the automated looms, the most expensive gold label jeans are produced with an even slower, more traditional method. By hand with an antique loom. It takes 1 hour for Kazuki Ikeda to weave just 10 centimeters of fabric. While this process raises the price, the extra effort gives the jeans a distinctly different feel.
一番の違いというのはやはりこの肌触り。通常の汎用のものでしたら、ちょっと硬さであったりゴワゴワした感じがするんですけれども、手織りの場合は最初から、柔らかい、質感で履いていただくことができます。
And for denim enthusiasts, traveling from Thailand to Tokyo is worth the trip to buy Momotaro's most expensive pair.
Usually when you brought a new pair of jeans, you feel it's a little bit hard. And you feel like it's a little bit hard to move at first, right? But this one, even from the start, it feels so comfortable, like you have worn it for some times.
After the fabric is woven by hand or shuttle loom, it heads to the sewing room. According to Heddles, on average, most other types of denim weigh between 11 and 14 ounces, while most denim from Japan weighs 20 ounces. A heavier fabric makes Naomi Takebayashi's job more challenging.
で一番太いのはタコ糸状態の0番はもう本当に太くてとても縫いづらいです。年数で言えば本当に何年縫っても私らも何年縫っても難しいところもありますしね。難しいというか縫うのはもう全然だけどあれでよかったかなとかいうことはありますね。
Another cornerstone of Japanese denim is the artisanal nature of the way the jeans are finally formed. At Momotaro, all the stitching is done by hand. The same goes for adding each copper rivet. The final look and feel of a finished pair largely depend on Takebayashi's dedication to detail. Because shuttle looms are less precise, the fabric will naturally have several imperfections. But if Momotaro's retail stores find anything wrong with a pair of jeans, they mark it with a small sticker and send it here to the quality control room. Takebayashi sifts through the flagged jeans using a tweezer to repair each marked spot. Momotaro is one of around 40 denim makers in Kojima, considered the birthplace of denim in Japan. While Japanese denim from this city has found a luxury category to call its own, the denim industry hasn't been prominent in Kojima for very long.
世の中日本中がですねやっぱり、アメリカに憧れて、東京オリンピック1964年ですかね、それを契機にですねガラッとやはり、自由とアメリカというのにすごい憧れが強くなり、音楽も映画もそうですけどもファッションも、その中でも学生運動でいろんなものが、もう自由奔放にいろんな形が、行われてきた。でその中でやはり1965年、が初めてこの小島というところでジーンズの生産が始まったと。
In the decades since, Japanese denim has reached far outside Japan. Today, it's considered one of the finest types of denim in the world.
Whether it's colours or patterns, artisans express their skill through the visual details of a craft. Damascus knives are prized for their striking swirl patterns. In order to achieve one of the most famous designs, master bladesmith Zach Jonas must twist a red-hot fusion of steels. But these unique swirls are more than just decorative. Successfully welding dozens or even thousands of steel layers creates some of the strongest and sharpest knives money can buy.
What people tend to notice right away when looking at Damascus is that visual pattern, and it ranges from very, very bold and big layers to very, very fine and shimmery layers. And you're going to see that pattern jump out at you, and you're going to see the way the light plays off of it, and it's going to shimmer and look almost holographic at times.
The bladesmithing community refers to this effect as chatoyance, or the shine of a cat's eye. Aside from the striking pattern, quality Damascus knives are known to be hard but flexible, and able to maintain a sharp edge. To make Damascus steel, Zach starts by layering 2 different kinds of high carbon steel. Managing the layers means more work for the smith. And while high-end mono steel knives may perform similarly, Damascus knives are coveted for their striking appearance and the craftsmanship required to achieve it. After tacking the layers together, Zach puts the stack in the forge and heats it to about 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. He needs an experienced eye to judge when the steel is ready, because it's at risk of breaking off the handle while the layers are not yet forge welded together. Zach needs to consider the kind of pattern he wants to make before he can begin forging. A bold pattern means fewer layers, and a more intricate pattern can require several thousand. And working with so many layers to achieve his intended design means lots of things can go wrong. Out of thousands of hammer strikes, a single blow in the wrong place can ruin the pattern. Even when the pattern is done to perfection, Zach has to forge the steel into a knife without distorting the design. And if he forges the steel when it's too cold, it can crack, and he has to start over, which for Damascus steel can mean losing weeks' worth of work. Once he forge welds the steel into a long bar, Zach can begin folding over the layers. The layer count has the most effect on the price. The more layers, the more folding and work for Zach, which means a higher price point. The pattern on this particular knife, called Texas Wind, has only 45 layers, which is why Zach sells it for just under $1,000. But his more expensive knives can have 5,000 layers, and that can take a month to complete, giving it a higher price tag.
So you can see I'm twisting the steel with this wrench. It's got to be real hot. If it gets too cool, the layers will want to shear and come apart, and then the piece is trash. I'm keeping track of the rate that I'm twisting at and counting as I go.
This technique is specific to twist Damascus, and it creates star-like patterns on the steel.
Too much twisting and the steel will want to shear, but the tighter the twist, the more dramatic the pattern. And that'll do it.
When Zach is making a standard Damascus wave pattern, he continues to work on elongating and thinning the bar using a power hammer. Zach's larger power hammer cost him $20,000. But that's just a drop in the bucket. He spent at least $100,000 on specialised machinery. But this large investment allows Zach to produce high-quality Damascus knives. Once Zach forges the tip of the blade, he cross-checks it with his template to ensure the knife looks exactly as it should.
Now it needs to undergo a metallurgical change, which is called heat treatment, and this part is hardening. And without doing this, the thing might be shaped like a knife, but it won't behave like a knife. It won't take an edge, it won't hold an edge. So the heat treatment is really a critical process, and it determines the metallurgy and therefore the performance of the finished knife.
But it's the quenching that makes or breaks the knife. Sometimes a blade will fail in the quench by cracking or warping irretrievably.
Looks like the blade came through the hardening process really well. It's straight, it doesn't have much warping. Little warps can be corrected, and I can see that the scale has blown away from the surface of the steel here, which tells me that the steel has contracted and become hard, and that's what I was looking for. So now this is ready for finish grinding and then a handle.
The grinding operation is one of the areas where the skill is kind of most important and most obvious, and this is one of the things that really drives the cost. A single slip can ruin the piece in an instant.
The handle is also an important factor when pricing the final product. Some materials, like local maple, are more affordable for Zach, but this Arizona ironwood costs him 10 times as much. It's also a harder wood than maple and requires more work to shape. Zach designs the handles so they serve the purpose of the knife. He makes kitchen knife handles slim, but large enough for the chef to have a firm grip. A hunting knife, on the other hand, requires different properties. It might be used with cold or wet hands, which can cause them to slip. The final step in creating a Damascus knife is the etching, which makes the pattern bolder to the eye. Once dipped in the etchant mixture, one of the alloys oxidizes and turns darker, while the other alloy resists, maintaining its color. Now, the Damascus pattern is revealed. But Zach isn't done yet. He needs to assess the quality of his creation.
Let's test the edge. And I use paper for this. This is a simple test. It should glide through with no problem.
This knife is razor sharp, with no dullness that needs adjusting. It's ready to sell to chefs like Diego Moya. Diego has been a chef for 27 years and focuses on vegetable cookery.
I've had some sharp knives, but this one kind of out of the gate just feels like it glides through without any resistance at all. It's pretty amazing. It just does exactly what your arm wants it to do. You don't have to fight it.
He's using a 10-inch chef's knife made by Zach, which costs $1,200.
I think the experience is one of effortlessness. I think you just forget that you're using a knife. And I think that when you forget you're using a knife and you use your arm to produce the cutting motion, that's pure bliss. For this kind of experience, you have to pay the price.
Zach's buyers typically know the work that's gone into the knife they purchase and the skill level required to make a quality Damascus knife. Zach is one of the fewer than 200 master bladesmiths designated by the American Bladesmith Society. To earn the title, they must successfully produce a Damascus blade with a minimum of 300 layers. The blade must be strong, tough, sharp, and balanced. In Zach's case, he had to take the test twice before getting the Mastersmith title. The knife performance test includes cutting through a 2x4 and even shaving hair off his arm. But it was the presentation test that set Zach back because of a 10-degree misalignment in the handle. Since becoming a mastersmith, Zach has continued to evolve his skills in Damascus making. One of his current projects might sell for over $100,000 if it's officially commissioned.
So this is a project that I've been working on designing for quite a while. This is a very elaborate Middle Eastern sword, a type of scimitar. This is a rough ground blade that I forged out of 1,500 layer Damascus.
The demand for Damascus knives has created a market for fake Damascus, where manufacturers imprint the swirl patterns on the knife and sell it at a more affordable price.
You can get a Damascus knife for $30, but it will not cut anything for you.
There's definitely a growing demand for Damascus steel. When I started out knife making, it was not super well known, and I've really seen it myself in the last 15 years or so as the cultural awareness has come up and people really understand what they're looking at.
Part of the beauty of handmade objects is that each one is unique. Nobuo Miya comes from a long line of kettle makers. He values quality and aesthetics over efficiency. In his workshop, artisans make kettles by pouring molten iron through a small opening in molds like this. Once the iron hardens, they continue the tedious work of hammering the kettle free. But it's the details placed on the inside that make each kettle unique.
This is Iwate Prefecture in Japan. Iron kettles have been made here for hundreds of years. Each one starts with a sketch. Nobuo Miya runs Kamasada, a workshop founded by his grandfather.
大体20歳ぐらいから始めてますんで、50年、まだ50年です。
Designing a new kettle takes him 2 to 3 years.
売れるものを作るっていうのは意外と早くできる仕事なんだろうと思いますけども、確かにビジネスですから売れるものを作るっていうのは絶対必要なことなんだけれども、じゃあ自分の気にそぐわないでもあんまり綺麗でなくても売れるものを作るかっていうと、それはうちはしないし。
At this workshop, every single kettle is made by hand. But before you start melting iron, you need a mold. The mold is made from 3 parts that form a gap where the iron is poured in.
そうすると、言った通りに外側と内側が間がこの 2.5 ミリから2ミリの隙間になるんですけども、その隙間を、この尻型の穴から流し込んだ液体の鉄が通って、鉄瓶になるという感じですね。
The core is destroyed with each use, but the outer molds are reused 2 to 3 times, depending on the design of the kettle.
それ以上になると明らかに質が目立って悪くなりますので、だから一型から一つしか取れないっていった場合ですと、単純に普通の品物の3倍はするわけですね。
According to Nobu, around 70% of the work is making the mold. This process also creates the most recognizable aspect of the design, this bumpy pattern called arare. This mold has around 2,000 dots, all placed by hand.
僕の場合はだいたい2時間半から3時間で全部押し切ってしまう感じですね。洗いの数が多くなればなるほど基本的には、鉄瓶の値段にはかかってきますね。はい、高くなってきますね。
Artisans coat the core with charcoal dust to make it easier to separate from the iron. Then Shitaro delicately places it inside the outer mold. But he won't know if something went wrong until the iron has cooled. There's a lot of anticipation waiting for the iron to melt. Shitaro has to mentally prepare for the pour, a dangerous and physically demanding task. A mistake here could ruin the kettle, so experience and confidence are essential. Once the iron cools, Shitaro finally sees the result of his hard work.
ここが一番ホッとするか、ああ失敗したってなるかっていうのが分かる瞬間でもありますね。できるだけ、 無理のない取り出し方をするという感じですね。これがまあ多少欠けている部分がありますけど、まあほぼ元通りになったということで、もう一回使いますね。まあまあですね。この中子の取り出しやすさっていうと80点ぐらいですかね。はい、安心ですね、ここでやっと。
Traditional iron kettles like this one don't have any enamel coating inside. Instead, artisans heat the kettle to 900 degrees Celsius on a bed of charcoal. This creates an oxidized layer, which helps prevent rust. Without an enamel coating, the iron subtly changes the taste of boiled water. But this kettle isn't done yet. The final stage is one of the most skill-intensive steps. Nobu heats up the kettle and brushes on lacquer, coating and coloring the outside.
仕上げ着色っていうのは意外とかなりベテランにならないと綺麗な仕上げができないっていうのは温度管理なんですね、これ難しいのは。そういう意味では、まあ、一番最終工程にふさわしく、あとは自分が思い描いてたものがこの着色一つで全然違うものになったりすることもあるんで、まあ、分業の方が効率的であることは分かってるんですけども、どうしても責任の所在が曖昧になったり、作る側が面白くなく作るんですね。で、物っていうのは面白く作らないといいものはできないっていうのは僕の考え方なんで。
Most kettles from Kamasada cost $300 to $400, but prices can be as high as $2,000. Despite the high price, customers appreciate the slow-paced nature of these kettles. The design is considered wabi-sabi, which is difficult to translate literally, but refers to the concept of appreciating imperfection and practicing mindfulness.
で、僕はデザインするときに決して便利なものっていうのがいいものではないと。っていうのは使って幸せになるものがいいものだと。お金を出してその僕の作った品物を評価して買ってくれるっていうのは、これはとても大事なことだと思います。それから一生使って次の代にも受け渡して自分らの美意識っていうのかな、心とか文化を伝えたいと。
Iron kettles were common in Japan in the 17th and 18th centuries when they were used in tea ceremonies. But they struggled to compete with convenient, mass-produced options after World War II. In recent years, interest in their aesthetic qualities has reignited demand. But that demand has brought on many knockoffs that can be bought for a fraction of the price. These kettles imitate the arare pattern, but usually aren't made in Japan. They also have an enameled interior instead of the bare iron used in the traditional version. But the original, uncoated interior is actually one of the main selling points. Customers say they like the taste of water boiled in these kettles, and some also value the small amount of iron content it adds to their water.
鉄瓶で沸かしたお湯がまろやかになること、鉄イオンが溶け込むことで塩素を分解するので軽き臭さが抜けて味が美味しくなる、まろやかになる。1世代前2世代前おじいちゃんおばあちゃんの家にあったっていう方の方が多いのが現状です。で今こうやってカフェで見に来ていただいた方は見たことはあるけど使ったことがなかったっていう人の方が多いです。
Despite an increase in popularity, Nobuho says that demand for this type of kettle isn't enough to sustain the business on its own.
私は昔からここは鉄瓶とか茶の絵ガムを使って家業なんですけども、 やっぱりそのライフスタイルに合った形でデザインして、提案しているというのがもちろん古い伝統的なテクニックを使った鉄瓶であるとかそれから茶の湯釜であるとかそういうものは作り続けて、その技術を伝承しようと思ってそういう仕事もやっております。
Shotaro, Nobuo's son, has trained in making iron kettles and plans on taking over the business to continue this centuries-old craft.
この工場の土間に敷いてある砂っていうのは鋳型を作る材料そのものの砂がもう敷かれてます。で鋳型ができて金属を流し込んだ後型を壊すときにこの土間にまた戻してしまいます。ここの土間は、うちの祖父が創業した100何年前からの砂も混じってるかもしれません。
Crafts like metalworking have been passed down from generation to generation. In Korea, 96-year-old master smith Lee Bong-ju is sharing his knowledge of Bangja Yugi. And that experience is essential because artisans work with fires over 1300 degrees Celsius. Too hot and the bronze will melt. Too cold and it will shatter. Bangja Yugi refers to Korean hand-forged bronzeware. It can take many forms, from pots to gongs. While Bangja Yugi production has largely been modernized, Lee Bong-ju is one of few Yugi masters who continue to produce certain pieces using traditional methods. Bong-ju, who is 96, has been making traditional Korean bronzeware for over 70 years.
저는 제가 선택해서 한 거 아니고 저거 그냥 지나는 팔자가.
In 1983, the South Korean government declared him a living national treasure. A single spoon, fully handcrafted by Bong-ju's team, costs $70. A set of 7 bowls costs over $1,800. Bong-ju starts off by measuring the ingredients. The perfect bronze alloy for Bangja Yugi is in the details. An exact ratio of 78% copper and 22% tin. The metals are heated to over 1300 degrees Celsius in order to melt and boil. Although the alloy will melt at a lower temperature, Bong-ju says that heating it to 1300 degrees ensures it can stretch without cracking once cooled.
그 합금에 어긋나게 되면은 늘어나지 않고 또 늘어난다 하더라도 이것에 하게 되면 손가락처럼 구멍이 뽕뽕 나기 때문에 그건 아주 안 되는 거죠. 아주 완전히 안 됩니다. 그건.
They then pour the molten alloy into a heated stone with a round cutout. Once the alloy cools, it becomes a bronze plate with a rounded bottom, referred to as a baduk. Bong-ju's team heats the cooled baduks again, so they can hammer them without risking breakage. One person cannot hammer the bronze alone, as they won't be able to move fast enough before the metal cools. Working quickly in a circle, artisans strike the red-hot baduk, stretching it until it's the desired size. Each careful blow of the hammer plays an essential role in shaping valuable yugi. This also means one misplaced hit could cause irreparable damage.
해닷을 이제 너무 한 놈이 잘못하게 해주고 깨져서 불락 나잖아요.
And it's not just the hammering that can ruin the baduk. Every step of the traditional process is manual, down to fanning the fire. Fanners push and pull the bellows, creating wind to keep the fire going. They depend on experience to determine how hot the fire is, and if they allow it to get too hot, the bronze melts. This particular fanner is still in training.
녹았네. 근데 요거는 지금 해는 과정에서 풀무하는 사람이 잘못하게 해주고 너무 과열돼서 거기 녹아내리게 불나해요.
Any defects and the bronze can't be sold. It has to be taken out of circulation, remelted, and processed all over again. After another round of hammering, Bong-ju cuts the baduk into a circle to the desired diameter.
이게 원대장의 그 숙련된 원대장 일이야. 그 사람이 이걸 얼마나 몇 센치에 따게 되면 원대장 그 자가 필요 없어요.
The baduk is then heated back up to working temperature, and the artisans begin another cycle of carefully hammering and shaping. Artisans stack the baduks on top of each other to shape multiple pieces simultaneously. This is efficient, but it's also safer than working them one at a time. Stacked bronze plates don't cool as quickly, so they're less likely to break. And broken metal doesn't just ruin the product, it can also be dangerous.
또 제 한쪽에 눈을 본래 좋았는데 1983년도에 일하다스리 그 파편이 뛰어가게 해주고 눈을 하나 제거했어요. 이게 가장 큰 사고고 그 외에는 뭐 그냥 서로 그 원칙적 것만 지키게 되면은 위험한 건 별로 없고.
Still, only a month later, Bongju went back to work. Once the pot takes form, Bongju can separate the layers, revealing multiple roughly shaped pots. His team then refines their shapes individually. The pot is repeatedly shaped, trimmed, and shaped again, all freehand, under the skilled and watchful eye of Master Bongju. Bronzeworking arrived in Korea around 1300 BC. The art form peaked starting in the 9th century AD when it began to be exported to neighbouring countries like China and Japan. The demand for bangjayugi fluctuated over time, but in the 1980s, producers saw interest in the bronzeware pick up.
우리 그 선조들이 밥그릇은 항상 밥 먹을 때 항상 녹그릇으로 밥을 먹고 숟가락, 젓가락 80년대 후반부터는 다시 이제 그걸 찾기 시작하더라고요. 그래서 1990년대, 2000년대 들어서부터 굉장히 붐이 많이 일어나는데.
That's Bongju's son. He's been making bangjayugi for 40 years. He says bangja is still popular in Korea. Part of its appeal is its antibacterial and antiseptic properties, particularly against bacteria like E. coli. But this demand created the necessity to modernize, to supply more bangjayugi while cutting down production costs.
근데 그럼에도 불구하고 그 유기의 그 전통미를 찾으려면 그 좀 약간 투박하고 그 투박함을 하려면 이제 그 우리들이 이제 만들다 보면 망시자국이 나오고 이제 그런 걸 또 좋아하시는 분들이 있어요. 이제 그런 분들은 손맛을 좋아하니까 그런 분들은 또 이제 저를 찾는 거고.
Back at the workshop, Bongju's team is almost done making a rice pot. Once the pot is in its near final shape, they quench it by dunking it in water. This removes some of the oxidized layers and prepares the pot for the last stage, shaving off the surface to reveal the soft-toned bronze underneath.
아까 보셨던 사람이 발로 돌려주면서 깎는 걸 가지려고 우리 영어로 가지려고 합니다. 껍데기 벗겨버리는 거. 아마 지금도 아마 5년 내지 10년, 20년 되지 않고 가질 때는 변화를 못 올라가요.
Due to the high demand for quality bangja and the need to sustain his business, Bongju too has mechanized some of the process. Even then, it requires highly skilled labor, as many stages are still performed by hand. But for Bongju, it's not about how much bangjayugi he can make, or how much he can sell it for.
기초적인 것, 전통적인 기법을 보존하려면 안 되는 그 가치를 우리가 다시 또 느끼게 됩니다. 가업으로 대대손손이 이걸 해나갈 방침을 세우고 있습니다. 또 원대장이 대략 꿈도 못 꾸고 살았었는데 보통 사간팔자라고 그러잖아요. 어떻게 내 인생이 살아온 게 방자유기만 할 수 있게끔 그게 살아왔는데 중간에
Sometimes, the craft finds the artisan, like with Peter Bellaby and his one-of-a-kind globes. What started as a desire to build a unique birthday present for his father grew into an obsession turned business with a years-long waitlist. Making a custom globe is no walk in the park. If these artisans make a single mistake laying a flat map over this giant custom sphere, they'll have to start the entire process over. Artisans customize every aspect of these globes, including hand painting each country and crafting the base it sits on.
If someone asks why it's so expensive, I invite them along to the studio and show them around and show them the processes we go through at every single level. When they leave, they fully understand why it takes so long.
Peter Bellaby founded London's Bellaby & Co. Globe Makers in 2008, and today it's one of the only studios in the world making globes by hand. The smallest globe it sells, the 12cm diameter pocket globe, can set you back almost $2,000. Its largest, the Churchill, has a 127cm diameter and can cost over $80,000. Since 2008, Bellaby has sold around 5,000 globes, ranging from maps of the Earth to the constellations and even the moon. 3 of those were featured in Martin Scorsese's Hugo, including a 40cm celestial globe. Production is limited because making a globe from scratch, entirely by hand, is no easy feat. At Bellaby, it requires cartographers, globe makers, painters, and woodworkers. And the price of these globes is largely a reflection of how many the team can make without compromising quality. The attention to detail starts with the spheres. Most sizes are made from fiberglass for its strength and durability. But what's most important is that it's a perfect sphere. Any deformation can result in uneven weight distribution, which affects how the globe spins. If that happens, Bellaby has to fix it by attaching a counterweight. Then there are the maps themselves. The cartography department focuses on accuracy and fulfilling the customer's imagination, like adding the Silk Road or the spice routes.
They highlight the places where they came from and where they might have immigrated to and where they got married and where their ancestors are from.
But Bellaby doesn't just customise its maps for creative or sentimental reasons. The details also affect where the company can sell its globes.
For instance, in India, I can actually go to prison for 6 months if I ship a globe to India that doesn't have the correct border between India and Pakistan.
And if any territories shift or new borders are drawn, Bellaby's newer iterations will reflect that. When the cartographers are done with all the necessary specifications, they print the map onto oblong strips called gauze. Now it can be handed off to globe makers like Eddie.
So with globe making, it's all about applying 12 or 24 gauze onto the sphere. So it all starts with cutting those gauze very, very precisely with a scalpel.
Makers have to cut the gauze to within 0.1 of a millimetre, so there are no gaps or overlaps when they're applied.
You could very easily cover an entire country based on the amount that you've extra overlapped because you've cut a little bit too much excess.
Eddie traces the latitude and longitude lines onto the sphere as guides. Then, he wets the gauze and glues them onto the surface, gently flattening them by hand. Even the slightest tension or miscalculated movement can cause a rip or wrinkle. When globe makers do make mistakes, they have to scrape off and replace the offending gore. If they're lucky, they'll only need to remove one, but sometimes the team has to redo the entire globe, including the cartography.
A lot of the times it does result in the globe being restarted, and that can even be at the final stage just before it's being packaged. While that doesn't happen often, when it does, everybody's upset, but it's just the only way that we can maintain a really high quality standard.
Correctly setting a single gore onto the massive Churchill globe can take an hour. Aside from size, factors like the temperature in the room or the consistency of the glue affect application time. The globe maker has to account for all of this, including their own breathing.
I found that cold showers actually help a lot with controlling breath. and that's really improved my making actually.
It takes up to 18 months for trainees to learn the most basic aspects of globe making, and much longer to master it. Eddie has been on the job for 6 years. When the gauze are finally set, the globe is ready for the painters, like Isis. She can bring the Earth, the Moon, or the constellations to life. She shades in the coastlines, mountain ranges, political borders, and any illustrations or customizations.
The difficulty on this stage is actually making all these gores the same color and consistent. It's almost like if you're making a painting but you have 12 different canvases and there has to be a continuation.
Some globes highlight different ocean depths, so Isis has to paint in ocean trenches in their exact location. She works deliberately, being careful not to paint neighbouring countries the same shades or let any watercolour run from one gore to the next. That's another mistake that risks having to start the whole globe all over again. At the woodshop, artisans are working on a base for the nearly complete Churchill globe. It's all done in-house by a dedicated team of 4. They engrave, chisel, and stain the wood based on customer specifications. At every stage of the globe making process, Peter encourages his team to take as long as they need.
It's very important that we spend the time that is required to make every single globe as best as it can be. It's finished when it's finished and when it's ready.
The cost of labour accounts for most of the price, since it usually takes 4 to 6 months to complete a globe and ship it out. But Bellaby also pays attention to the materials it uses. The inks it uses for printing can last between 80 and 200 years in gallery conditions. The origin story of Bellaby globes is just as peculiar as the globes themselves. In 2008, Peter decided to make a globe for his father's 80th birthday. He went through hundreds of globes and thousands of pounds before he was happy with the result.
In about 2011-12, I sold my house to fund, because this is a bottomless pit of money. I used to go down to the municipal dump every 2 weeks with an estate car full of trial globes.
And once he got it right, he wanted to keep making them. But Peter didn't expect the warm reception these boutique globes received. The company was recently commissioned to work on a globe for the Louvre, and its largest globe has a waitlist of 2 years. Peter attributes this demand to the rise of consumer interest in handmade products. The global handicraft market size reached $680 billion in 2021 and is expected to exceed $1 trillion by 2027. Bellaby & Co. too has seen this consistent rise in demand for its handmade globes. The company says it turns multi-million-dollar revenues year after year. And it expects this to continue, even at high price points for its niche products.
What I love so much about what we do is that it is so deeply personal. You can tell someone's whole life story in it.
The pursuit of perfection isn't limited to handmade objects. Japan has a long tradition of delightfully detailed agriculture. In Uji, Jintaro Yamamoto expertly grows ceremonial grade matcha. The greener matcha is, the smoother and more complex its flavour. And while this bright green powder takes a few seconds to dissolve in water, the plant it comes from can take an entire year to grow. Matcha at its highest quality is referred to as ceremonial grade because of the central role it plays in Japanese tea ceremonies. Lower quality matcha, also called culinary grade matcha, can be made sweet with sugar and cream in desserts, but in its tea form, it's very bitter.
お抹茶っていうフレーバーというか、フレーバーとして広がっている部分がすごくあると思うんですけど、実際飲んだことない方の方が大半かなとは。
Jintaro is a 6th generation matcha producer. He runs a 180-year-old tea farm, one of the oldest in Uji, Japan, a city with a centuries-old tea history.
本当にこの2週間で1年間のお茶の味が決まるので、この2週間に全てをかけてやっていますね。
In spring, they sprout young, tender leaves, and that's the sign that matcha season has begun.
新芽の匂いですね。この匂いを嗅ぐと本当にこの季節が来たなと思います。本当に楽しみでもありますし、本当にチャレンジ挑戦でもありますし、まあ本当になんていうかいろんな気持ちが渦巻く2週間ですね。体力的にはすごくしんどいですけど、精神的にはすごく楽しくできているかなと思ってますね。
To make matcha, he only needs the very first leaves of the plant. It's there that there's a higher concentration of nutrients, and they will make the best quality tea.
その旨味が強くて苦味が少ないものを目指して作りたいなと思っていたりするので、それをやっぱり実現するのは、本当にもう触れば折れるほど柔らかいので力は積むのにはいらない。古い葉っぱは逆に引っ張っても取れなかったりする。
At peak harvest, collecting leaves can take hours, but the reason why the plants are in the shade is not to protect those plucking them from the sun, but to protect the plants themselves. Extensive exposure to sunlight develops bitterness in the leaves. Blocking the sunlight preserves their flavour and gives them a bright green colour. Before harvest in the spring, the plants spend 30 to 40 days in the shade. Gintaro uses rice straw panels to shade his plants, a method that's become extremely rare among tea farmers. Most farmers now use plastic nets. They're more convenient and can be reused.
ジメチルスルフィドっていう海苔っぽい香りっていうのが、いわゆる覆い香と言われるその覆いをしたお茶から香る香りがあるんですけども、
Gintaro's plants spend double the time in the shade of what is recommended to make matcha, which is 20 days. While plants that make lower grades of matcha are harvested 2 or 3 times a year, ceremonial grade matcha is made from plants that have been plucked only once. After an entire day of picking, Gintaro's work is just getting started.
摘み終わってからも茶の芽はずっと息をし続けているような状態なので、できるだけフレッシュな状態で、蒸して乾燥させるために、そうですね、早い、その日中には絶対やりたいなというところです。昨日作業終わったのは、そうですね、本当に11時半から12時ぐらいで、キロに着いたのは、1時前でしたね。どういう蒸しをしたらいいのか、どういう乾燥したらいいのか、やっぱり最初の方の日にちのもの、例えばもう今日なんていうのは本当にちょっと一番気を使うところではあります。
The first step of processing of the leaves is steaming. Steaming locks in the flavour and preserves their bright green colour. But most of all, it prevents oxidation, which would turn them into black tea.
発酵酵素を止めてしまうということ、その緑を維持するという作業になるかなと。ただその蒸しの通し具合で
After steaming, the leaves go into this leaf spreader, a series of 4 mesh tubes where they're rapidly cooled by the wind. This eliminates the water on the leaves and prepares them for the next step, drying. The tea leaves at Gintaro's farm are dried using a 97-year-old furnace, which gives them a unique roasted aroma.
この風合いを守りながら、なるべく自分の理想とするところのいいものができるようにしたいなと思って。
After drying, the stems are removed and the leaves are sorted. Leaves up until this point are called tencha, and they will only become matcha after they're turned into a green powder. But before doing that, Gintaro usually tastes the unrefined leaves. He's very critical of his work.
いい感じ。蒸しは通ってますね。毎回します。
やっぱりどういうものができたかっていうのが湯に浸すとすごく香りとかも分かりやすいので、結局乾物の状態でもある程度の香りは分かるんですけど、湯に浸した方がすごく分かりやすい。でお抹茶になった時にどういう風になるかなっていう想像ができやすいですね。まあ具体的に言うと、色はうちのものにしてはすごくいいなと思ってます。あとは味も、苦味は全然なくてそれはすごくいいんですけど、うまみもなくはない。ただやっぱりなんというか、いつもそうなんですけど、結局理想はすごく高くて毎年まあまあって言ってると思います。よく諸先輩方にも共通して同じ気持ちだなって思うのは、本当に一生のうちに満足できるお茶ができるのなんて1回か2回ぐらいと。
Ceremonial grade matcha is ground using a stone mill. It's designed to grind counterclockwise only. This traditional method grinds a fine powder that preserves the nutrients of the leaf, but it's very slow. It takes Gintaro an entire hour to grind just 40 grams of matcha. With an automated crusher, this would happen in seconds. The matcha stone mills are some of the most traditional instruments in Japan. They're made of granite and are entirely hand-carved. Just one of these stone mills can cost over $1,300. It grinds the matcha into a fine, glossy powder. But once matcha is ground, the fragrance slowly disappears and becomes more delicate. So Gintaro usually grinds it one more time before selling it.
いただきます。やはり苦味渋みの少なさとうまみ、朝日独特の香りと、あとは東園ならではの最古、日本最古の天茶乾燥炉ならではの少し火を感じるというか、香ばしいような香りが入っているのが特徴的かなと思いますね。
Ceremonial grade matcha contains a higher level of an antioxidant called catechin and more chlorophyll than other green teas. This is as a result of the shading process and the slow grinding. While the Japanese public has long been familiar with the distinction between ceremonial grade and culinary grade matcha, it's relatively new to the rest of the world. But matcha's popularity has been soaring. In 2020, the global matcha market was worth $3 billion, and it's expected to exceed $5.5 billion by 2027. In the last 10 years, exports of matcha from Japan have doubled. Compared to 30 years ago, they've quadrupled. But these numbers barely refer to ceremonial grade matcha. The lower costs of production, faster turnaround, and the ability to harvest leaves up to 3 times a year have made culinary grade matcha a more popular choice for farmers. In Uji, only 60 families are left growing ceremonial grade matcha. For Gintaro, taking over the family business wasn't an obvious choice.
お茶についてあんまり深く考えたことがなかったので、もうやりたくないんだよねとか言ってると、なんかそんな素晴らしいことって本当に世界的にも希少だよっていうこと、もう今では本当に仕事というよりも本当に半分なんというか趣味ではないですけど、非常に好きでやっているっていうところがあるかなと思います。
Once all this year's young leaves are picked and ground into matcha powder, Gintaro will spend the fall pruning the trees, ploughing and fertilizing the soil. Come winter, he will weave the rice straw to shade his plants, and new leaves will sprout again, ready to be turned into matcha.
今18年お茶に携わってますけど、理想のお茶っていうのは本当にできてないと思っていますし、ただ多分ずっとそうなのかなとも思っているんですけど、難しいんですけど、僕は本当にお茶が好きでやっているので、次また頑張ろうということにもなりますし、楽しいところにもなりますね。
Further south on Japan's Kyushu Island, farmers spend an entire year growing the perfect mango. These are not just any mangoes. They are Daio no Tamago, or egg of the sun. Stunning, red, perfectly unblemished, and incredibly sweet mangoes that are farmed in the Miyazaki prefecture.
大変ですね。全てのマンゴー農家さんがうまくいってるわけじゃないと思うんですよね。
Every April, the best mangoes from the prefecture are auctioned off at Miyazaki Central Wholesale Market.
Mangoes farmed in Miyazaki are from the Irwin mango variety, a type often referred to as apple mango, as it turns red when ripe. Irwin mangoes are actually pretty common and are also grown in other parts of the world and sold at much lower prices. This is because the exclusivity of Taiyo no Tamago is not tied to which type of mango it is, but rather to the care it receives. In order to generate buzz at the auction, a mango needs bees. To increase their odds of success, farmers like Takuya usually rent bees during the flowering season. These are flowering mango plants. Bees play a crucial role in the pollination of the plants, as without them, mangoes would not grow as big as desired.
ミツバチにもよるんですけど、たくさんなった木には1本の木に200個くらいなるんで、これをまだ鳴らした方がいいからっていうので鳴らしてるんですよ。普段も落とすんですよこれ。だからマンゴー農家としてはこれ作るようじゃダメなんですね。ミツバチが交配しない場合はこういう小さい実になるんですね。もうこれ以上大きくはならないんですよ。
If a plant keeps flowering as the farmer wants, it can survive as long as 35 years. Takuya's plants are 20 years old. However, even if bees do pollinate the plants, it doesn't necessarily mean that all mangoes will qualify as Taiyo no Tamago this season. Only those that are in good shape, visibly contain pits, and are in good position will be given a chance. To successfully grow one, everything in the greenhouse needs to run smoothly. Temperature must be constant, the room ventilated, the air dehumidified, and the mangoes protected from gravity. When everything else is in place, Takuya's priority becomes the sunshine.
太陽の光が当たることによって実の色も赤い鮮やかになりますし、糖度も上がるんですね。やっぱり日陰にあると実の色も悪いですし、糖度も低くなっちゃうんで、やっぱり太陽の光はどうしても大事ですね。
If a mango slumps into the shade, Takuya will tie it with a string to bring it back up. And to make sure that sunlight touches every part of the fruit equally, he developed these light reflectors out of milk cartons.
反射板をつけることによってですね、マンゴーの実の下の方まで色がつくんですね。でこの紫のところが熟すと赤くなるんですけど、緑の部分が多いとですね、この下の方が熟しても黄色なんで、できるだけ全てを赤にするために反射板をつけています。多分パック使われる方は今のところいないんじゃないですかね。硬いんで結構水平になるんですね。以前はもっと柔らかい紙を勧められてたんですけど、それだと下に下がっちゃうんでちょっと使いづらい部分もありましたね。
Regardless of how much it's worth, Takuya treats every mango with respect. In return, every mango repays him with a unique flavor.
甘みと酸味がある感じですね。フルーティーです。表面に傷が入ってますし、赤みも下の方まで入ってないんで、これは太陽の卵にはならないと思います。
Takuya has been growing mangoes for 16 years, a craft he learned from his father. This year, he grew 9,500 mangoes in his greenhouse. They're now ready to be inspected to see how many of them have earned the coveted Taiyo no Tamago title. The first inspection is done by human eye. Inspectors closely analyze each mango's appearance to ensure they are red all throughout, with no hints of green at the bottom. Then, a machine sorts them according to sugar content, weight, and size.
それから糖度が15度以上と重量が 350g 以上、規格で言いますと 2L 以上の基準をクリアしたものだけが太陽の卵になります。
These inspections sort the mangoes into 5 grades, 2 of which are Taiyo no Tamago.
期にもよりますけど、年間で大体よくて 13% から 15% 程度の発生率ということですので、大体約全体の1割がシーズンとして太陽の卵になりますので、結構割合としては少ない方なのかなと思います。
The mangoes will now make their way to Miyazaki Central Wholesale Market for the auction. All the care and hard work that Takuya and other farmers in the prefecture put into their fruit are leading up to this very moment. The hope is to match or exceed the previous figure of 500,000 yen.
でサイトの場合ってその時期に出す方って5、6人しかいないんですね。やっぱその時のやっぱ出される方ってみんなこうライバルみたいに感じなんで、やっぱ頑張んなきゃいけないなっていうのはすごい思いますね。
皆さんおはようございます。本日は令和4年の宮崎産出番号太陽の卵の解禁日となっております。
The auction has officially begun at the Miyazaki Central Wholesale Market. This year's 500,000 yen is 300,000 yen higher than last year and matches the 2019 record. And the farmer who grew these mangoes is Takuya.
すごいですよね。やったと思いましたね。
It's the third year in a row his mangoes fetched the highest price at the auction. They have been bought by a department store in Fukuoka.
そうですね、もう11時ぐらいの飛行機に私がもう手で直接持ってそのまま福岡市にある百貨店の中のうちの売り場があるんですけども、そこにも並べます。あと福岡から、この太陽の卵っていう果物を全国に知っていただきたいという思いからつけました。
Today's outcome was a successful one for Takuya. But even in a country with a strong gift-giving culture like Japan, it's not always guaranteed that such a luxury fruit will find a buyer at auction.
だからこういうコロナの状況で、いろんな消費者も物価が上がって大変だと思うんですけど、頑張ってやっぱり市場の人がですね、販売して仲卸の人が買ってもらってですね、やっぱマンゴーファンがいるんだなと。こんな状況でもコロナで大変な状況でもちょっとした値段がついても買ってもらえる状況があるなと。やっぱり自分のご褒美にしてる人がいるのかなと。
After flowering, fruiting, harvesting, and auctioning, Takuya's mango plants are ready for a new season. And the hard work isn't over yet.
花が咲いて実がなって収穫終わったらこの枝をまた戻します。一節戻してが剪定作業になります。やっぱハウスの中すごく暑いんで、その作業は結構大変ですね。こう納得いかなかったら納得いくまでこうやるみたいなところがあるんで、スポーツやってたんで負けず嫌いなところがあって、やっぱ人よりいいものを作りたいっていうのはあるんですね。それがいいのかもしれないですね。
The drive to find a better way to make a better product can also be found in Extremadura, Spain. Eduardo Sosa is one of the few people in the world making what his supporters call ethical foie gras. Many consider foie gras to be unethical because it's typically made by force-feeding ducks or geese to fatten their livers. Eduardo does things differently, increasing the production time and price of his product.
Mi familia lleva haciendo este sistema desde que sepamos nosotros el año 1812 y desde entonces no hemos parado. Nuestro foie se produce pues de una forma muy sencilla. Nosotros tenemos una serie de gansos salvajes domesticados.
When the weather turns cold and the bird migration season begins, wild geese join the tamed geese on Eduardo's farm. Here, the geese feast upon grass, acorns, olives, figs, and different seeds.
Fijaros cómo lo comen y que les encanta la bellota
Instead of force-feeding the birds, Eduardo simply relies on the geese's natural behaviours. There are no fences here. The geese are free to come and go as they please. Eduardo says the geese eat more grass when they're free to roam. He says this is essential because the grass apparently makes the acorns taste sweeter to the geese. And the more acorns the geese eat, the tastier and yellower their livers will be. While Eduardo prefers to let the geese eat what they want, he does provide them with organic corn to make their livers more yellow.
Hace años nuestro hígado era mucho más oscuro que el que es ahora, y entonces viendo en el mercado que la tendencia era una cosa más amarilla, más blanquita, más tal, pues se nos ocurrió de darle maíz ecológico, porque nos dimos cuenta que dándole maíz ecológico es como un colorante, entonces queda más bonito el hígado, ¿no? El foie.
During this time of year, geese stuff themselves full of food to prepare for their winter migration. This quickly builds fat and enlarges their livers, the perfect conditions for creating foie gras. When it's time for the slaughter, Eduardo uses a traditional technique to stun the geese: hypnosis. He says this makes the process as painless as possible. It happens only once a year during the coldest part of winter, when the geese have the most fat. It also has to be a moonless night.
Pues que localizamos las quedas, ¿no? Donde están los grupos de gansos, y luego con luz, vamos con una luz LED muy potente y hacemos que se queden hipnotizados, ¿saben? Las aves cuando le da una luz fuerte pues se quedan quietas y se quedan hipnotizadas. De esa forma las podemos coger fácilmente y además el animal pues no sufre absolutamente nada. Es una muerte dulce, como se dice, ¿no?
Eduardo's foie gras is so highly sought after because of how flavourful it is. To preserve its unique flavour profile, Eduardo prepares his foie gras very simply.
Hemos cogido el horno, le hemos metido leña, lo estamos calentando y luego lo que vamos a hacer ya en estos envases especiales para conserva es calentarlo para que se cocine y como si fuera una cocina normal, ¿vale? Esto es lo que llamarían los franceses un hígado entier. Entier es que es una pieza entera del ganso metida en el frasco y cocinado, no tiene mayor historia, no lleva absolutamente nada, es 100% natural. Y el sabor pues maravilloso, un sabor muy suave, una crema, algo increíble, es un sabor extraordinario. Sabe a naturaleza, sabe una mezcla entre bellota, semilla, hierba, un toque dulzón por los higos y da, pues bueno, es algo único, algo único. El ganso se aprovecha absolutamente todo, ¿eh? Entonces, cuando hacemos el proceso, también aprovechamos las pechugas para hacer este delicioso jamón. Que publicitamos siempre que el foie es algo que se debería consumir una sola vez en la vida, ¿vale? No queremos que se abuse, no es un alimento que por mucho dinero que tenga una persona no debe abusar del consumo. Es algo que hay que probar, disfrutarlo en una ocasión muy, muy, muy especial.
So despite the high demand, Eduardo won't make more than 2,000 batches a year. He says he's committed to maintaining the wild geese population and heavily discourages overconsumption, unlike most foie gras producers.
Bueno, pues la industria lo que ha hecho es aprovechar la capacidad natural del ganso de generar grasa en su hígado, pues para hacerlo industrialmente. Les ponen una temperatura para que los gansos se crean que están en invierno, le ponen un aire acondicionado muy frío, entonces y le empiezan a dar mucha comida con una máquina que le entra en el estómago y le empiezan a meter comida. Pues que le dan de comer muchas veces, durante el día para generar muchísima grasa. Entonces el hígado se le pone bestial, imaginaros, puede llegar a pesar hasta 2 kilos el hígado de un ganso, más o menos. Entonces, y eso lo hacen en 7-8 días, ¿vale? Cuanto en la naturaleza pues necesita un año, una vida, en fin, hay mucha diferencia. La industria ha inventado un foie aprovechando los genes del ganso, y entonces inventó un animal hecho en laboratorio que es el pato, que le llaman pato mular o pato mudo. Entonces es un animal hecho en un laboratorio, y entonces lo que hacen, que lo han hecho mudo para que no moleste, para que no esté dando chillos y tal, y consiguen un hígado muy grande. Ese es el foie que come todo el mundo, en los restaurantes, en todo el mundo, que es lo que hay, es una barbaridad.
In recent years, climate change has pushed back the farm's traditional foie gras making timeline.
En la época de mi padre, pues los gansos se elaboraba el producto a finales de octubre y ahora pues nos vamos a noviembre, diciembre, enero, incluso algún año en febrero, algún año hemos tenido marzo, pero bueno, que al final lo importante es que haga frío, que las bellotas y las hierbas y todo salgan. Eso que lo mismo nos da un mes más, un mes menos o 2 meses, ¿no?
Regardless of when it's made, Eduardo's foie gras, or natural foie gras as he calls it, has an extremely long waiting list every year. There was limited demand for Eduardo's foie gras until 2006, when he and his team won the coveted Coup de Coeur Award at the Seal Food Expo in Paris.
Desde entonces comenzó de verdad la demanda. Bueno, fue cuando el CIFOG, la Asociación de Productores de Foie de Francia, nos quiso impugnar el premio diciendo que nuestro foie al ser natural no se podía considerar foie. Están continuamente poniéndonos demandas y están siempre que si el nombre, que si tal. Entonces, para no tener conflicto con ellos, siempre decimos que nuestro producto no es foie gras, ¿vale? De esa forma, nosotros ahora le denominamos foie natural gras, no foie gras.
Despite challenges and criticism from other foie gras producers, Eduardo's product has only continued to become more popular.
Te das cuenta que los grandes chefs del mundo, los mejores chefs del mundo, pues alaban el sabor, ¿no? Dicen que es algo increíble. Tenía el caso del chef Dan Barber en Estados Unidos, que dijo que era lo mejor que había probado en su vida, ¿no? La experiencia culinaria más grande de su vida, porque es que es algo diferente, totalmente.
La Pateria de Sousa's natural foie gras costs €199 and sells out every year.
El precio no creo que baje nunca, puesto que mientras se siga produciendo a pequeña escala, pues bueno, tenemos que compensar el coste de una cría de pocos animales en muchísimo territorio, pues con el precio es algo lógico y normal.
Despite the hefty price tag, Eduardo says he doesn't see much of a profit from his foie gras. Geese require more land than other livestock. Most people in his area prefer to raise Iberian pigs, which are very profitable.
Por eso la gente, los vecinos, pues no tienen mucho interés en criar ganso. A nosotros nos ven como un poquito los locos del tema. La cría del ganso, pues bueno, es mi pasión, ¿no? Claro, no, es una pasión, es mi vida, es mi pasión. Mi padre me enseñó, yo estoy enseñando a mis hijos y lo que queremos es que esto no se pierda, ¿no? Y que la gente, ojalá saliera más gente a producir ganso.
But it wasn't Eduardo's family who invented the natural foie gras tradition.
Fueron los hebreos los que vinieron a la península ibérica y trajeron esta cultura del antiguo Egipto, ¿no? Es una forma muy inteligente, primero de respetar al animal, segundo de obtener grasa pues para la cocina. Ellos tenían la sabia costumbre de instalarse en los pasos de migración de aves, como es el caso de esta granja, ¿vale? Entonces ellos tenían una serie de gansos salvajes domesticados, ¿vale? Que domesticaban y que hacían que luego atraían los gansos silvestres a la granja, ¿vale? En épocas de migración. Pues bueno, tenemos que, gracias a estas personas, desgraciadamente, estas personas judías tuvieron que abandonar España, expulsados por los reyes católicos, con el famoso decreto de expulsión del año 1492. Nosotros, bueno, pues nos quedamos con ese legado, con esa sabiduría de estas personas, y aquí queda, pues, un poquito de su historia.
Finding a new way to produce the world's rarest foods isn't easy. It's a process that can require years of trial and error. In Japan, Masaki Ishii developed a new variety of the famous Wagyu steak by feeding Wagyu cows a special feed made from olives.
食べてみて、今日腹いっぱい牛肉食べても次の日油がさらっとしとる関係以上またあくる日も牛肉が食べられます。
Masaki has dedicated decades to creating a system of recycling-oriented farming, but his idea wasn't an immediate success. The sun is rising over Shodoshima in Japan's inland sea. Masaki Ishii has been raising cattle here for half a century.
牛2頭を高校から連れて帰りました。卒業証書の代わりに牛をくださいということで。
Shodoshima, literally small bean island, was once famed for its adzuki beans. But after olive trees were introduced from Greece just over a century ago, it became more famous as the home of Japan's oldest olive groves.
小豆島の宝です、オリーブは。オリーブを与えているいうことを私一人が始めとしておりました関係上、動物油と植物油のオレイン酸が融合すればどこにもない香川県らしき美味しい牛肉ができるだろうということから始めました。
Wagyu beef is already known for its intense marbling and high levels of oleic acid, both of which make the meat extra tender and flavorful. Masaki set out to create a Wagyu even richer in oleic acid.
でオリーブにはこれ植物油のオレイン酸が多く含まれておりますので、生を持って帰って実際やったところ、牛は見向きもせん。ベロで横にやっても2日経っても3日経っても食べてくれませんでした。干し柿をおばあちゃんが90歳のおばあちゃんが渋柿の皮を剥いて干しているのを見て、これで渋が抜けるんやったら干したらオリーブも抜けるだろう思って乾燥して飼料化しました。
But instead of using fresh olives, Masaki turned to olive pomace, the residue from olive oil production. Doing so allowed him to recycle a waste product from one of Shodoshima's major industries.
オリーブの絞った後で畑へほかしとる近くの人がもう嫌な匂いがするんやというような苦情も聞きまして、これなら利用して完全にで牛が食べてそれで堆肥ができたらオリーブ園へまた戻してあげたら完全にオリーブの一環の循環型農業になるな思って。
Olive pomace still contains a lot of oil. Drying it is a difficult and costly process, one that took Masaki almost 6 years to perfect.
非常に高価な飼料でね、日本一高い飼料なんです。1日3回朝昼晩天日干しで、手で上下かやして乾燥することによってオリーブがカラメル風いうんですかね、香りが。で牛の非常に喜んで食べる指向性のいい香り味になったんです。で持ってきたところ非常に牛が今まで見向きもせん横にのけよったものにパクついて食べてくれて、おおやったという感動が今でも忘れません。
Around 2 months before the cattle is shipped out, Masaki starts mixing the dried pomace into their feed every day.
出荷前2ヶ月以上1日あたり100グラム以上オリーブ飼料を食べさせたものがオリーブ牛です。そんなんでもうたまたま市場へ出荷したところ1日あたり250グラム与えとった牛が非常に喜ばれて、もうそれを基本にそれでいこういうね、250に2ヶ月以上。
Every morning, Masaki comes in to check on his cows while they're still asleep.
で入って牛が知らん顔してこう練り返しとれんやけど、練りもかやさんと起きてこんようやったらどっかがね起きた途端に寝ておりますから起きたら 糞尿の出具合。
While other varieties of Wagyu are typically sold to be processed at 24 to 26 months, olive Wagyu doesn't ship out until 30 months. The longer raising time and high cost of the feed make olive Wagyu difficult to come by, but despite the limited supply, it has become especially popular with chefs.
肉質がとてもしっとりと柔らかくて、大変使いやすい牛肉になっています。当レストランのシグニチャーディッシュとして用意させていただいてますのは、オリーブビーフになっております。前菜からメインまで、全ての皿にオリーブビーフを使います。お値段は3万円から3万5千円ぐらいで今のところ計画しています。オリーブビーフなんですけれども、最近は出回る量も少なくなってきました。人気が世界中で上がってきたみたいで、値段も一緒に上がってきている印象があります。
When Masaki first started experimenting with olives, he kept it a secret from his buyers.
私一人で始めて、で黙って市場へ出荷しておりましたら、そしたら市場の一番の社長さんに専務が、食べて生肉を食べまして、これ非常に美味しい牛肉に変わったぞと初めて褒めていただけて、これはいけるなと思いまして。
But in 2010, an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Miyazaki Prefecture devastated Japan's livestock industry. Despite successful efforts to contain the disease locally, the damage was done. Countries like the United States suspended beef imports from Japan. Disaster struck again with the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami of 2011. As Japan struggled to recover and rebuild its economy, Masaki looked towards strengthening his prefecture's beef production. He led the charge towards working with more local olive farmers. In 2012, other farmers on Shodoshima started following Masaki's methods to raise olive-fed cattle. Just 1 year later, olive Wagyu began shipping to places outside of Shodoshima and Kagawa Prefecture. Today, there are about 2,500 olive-fed cattle on Shodoshima. Still, this is nothing compared to places like Kagoshima or Miyazaki, where high-quality Wagyu production has been taking place for decades. On Masaki's farm, there are just 20 head of cattle.
非常に頭数を増頭するいうてもなかなかできない状態です。最終は3000頭目標ですかね。
To reach this goal, the cattle farmers of Shodoshima need help from the local olive producers.
でオリーブ業界にとってもメリットがある。牛糞を与えたら、オリーブは非常によく育ちます。化学肥料よりも木の勢いが良いらしいです。牛を飼い始めたのは循環型有機農業がしたくて、それで始めました。もう諦めんと、これを絶対ものにしたい、成功させたい、香川県のものにしたいという気力が非常にありました。